place in this world or never belong. I gotta be me. I gotta be me. What else can I be but what I am? I want to live, not merely survive.
I'd like to ask you a question. See, boxing was also been a passion of yours. And could you tell us something about the boxing and how you got involved and how you're actually still involved today?
Yeah. I was an amateur boxer since I was 14, 15 years old. I fought for the Catholic youth organizations, the Golden Gloves, when I was after 16 years old. You had to be 16 to get the Golden Gloves. And I fought amateur boxing in amateur tournaments around Brooklyn called Smokers at Prospect Park Arena, Ridgewood Grove Arena in Ridgewood. And then as I said, I fought in the United States Air Force, representing the United States Air Force boxing team over in Japan, leading up to the Olympics. I never got that far. However, today, I stay with boxing, the spirit of Ring 8. My father was one of the founders. He started at Creashy's Restaurant, a round table with 3 or 4 other wise guys that put money in the middle of the table to help indigent fighters who couldn't buy their own medication and couldn't afford it, couldn't pay their rent, and they got out of boxing with no money. In those days, you could have been a 10-round fighter and make $900. And this is what was going on because there was no TV. So therefore, you had no TV rights and no TV money, so you had to worry about the tickets that were sold at the door. And TV became known, and then all the fighters wanted to get involved in TV bouts. There was more money in it. And, of course, at that time, you had to go to a Jimmy Knapp to get a TV bout. Now, what happens is I belong to Ring 8, Veteran Boxers Association of New York. There's over 330 of us. And we have our meetings once a month at the Waterfront Crab House in Long Island City. And what happens is the spirit of my father is there whenever I hear a speaker, whenever I do speaking. And we raise funds for indigent fighters who cannot afford to buy their own medication, help pay their rent for them, as long as they can prove they were a prize fighter. Whether they be a 4-round fighter, whether they be an amateur boxer, they could come to our organization called Ring 8, Boxers Helping Boxers. And we have a 6-time world champ that doesn't have a penny to his name today, Emil Griffith. And he's one of our members. And he's a big inspiration for other fighters. Don't be embarrassed. Come forward. We could help you. And if they don't come forward, we find them. We find them sometimes in nursing homes. We found Kid Gavilan, 3 or 4-time world champ, in a nursing home, died, and before he died, we had an escort from Miami to Long Island City here in New York to honor him. And he came in with Bojack, and Bojack was in a nursing home not far from Kid Gavilan in Miami. We found them, and when Kid Gavilan died a year later, we went out there. Ring 8 went out there, because he was buried in Pottersfield. He had no relatives. When we went out there with the money, over $15,000, to bury him with dignity and with a recording on the tombstone with his record, and all you have to do is press a button, and we pay every year to the cemetery maintenance people to make sure that recording is always working. It runs on a battery. Now, it's built into the tombstone. Now, we put him there. You'll be surprised how many relatives came out looking for money. All of a sudden, relatives of his came out. But Kid Gavilan told me back in 1957, I was at the 79th Street Causeway in Miami Beach, Florida. And this is what he told me. He said, Tony Knapp, let me tell you something. He spoke broken English. His interpreter was Willie Pastrano, who at the time was retired light heavyweight champ. Willie told me that Kid said this. You asked him, how you doing today? I said, that's right. He tells me to tell you this. He can't go back to Cuba. Castro tied up all his farmland, his farm, his money, everything. He's here, and he's living on welfare in Miami. And he said to tell you that he's the richest man in the world because he's got his freedom. And I never forget what Kid Gavilan said. And I told the members at Ring 8 when I was instrumental in putting together to raise the funds to bury him with dignity.
You know what, Tony? That's an inspiration, and it's so incredibly wonderful of you to continue to do something that for fighters today. I'd like to switch a little bit, and when I read this in the book, it blew me away. And there's a story about a guy who came into your dad's pool hall and challenged him in a game of pool. Can you talk about that? That's just amazing.
Yes, that same individual I met years later, and what happened was this. Tommy Murphy's pool hall. That's when my father was hanging out in that pool hall since he was 15, 16 years old before he married my mother. That was in Williamsburg. Tommy Murphy, his real name is Tommy Murphy Napolitano. No relation to me. There was a pool table in the back of the room, king size. And this here guy comes in with his own cue stick. And he goes to the back to practice some shots, and he pays his fee. And now he says he wants to challenge somebody. He was a hustler. And my father went over to him and said, listen, at that time, this man was thin. He wasn't fat. But my father still used the expression fat. Listen, you fat-ass bastard, get out of here. What do you think, this is a pool hall? That's a crap table. We use that to shoot craps. So if you want to go use a table, use one of the smaller tables up front. So my father escorted him out. Years later, I met that individual in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, 1971. And Jimmy Fazio's House of Prime Rib on Route 1 in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. That man had a carnation in his lapel, and I was with my wife, and he sent the waiter over to say, tell Tony Knapp with that woman he's with to come over to my table and join me. I know that's Jimmy Knapp's son. So the waiter told me, and I went over to his table, and I'll tell you who the individual was. I sat down with him, and he gave my wife his carnation, and he kissed her on the forehead. And he said, I'm the guy who was in that pool hall when your father chased me out years ago. That was Jackie Gleason.
Absolutely amazing. And in fact, your dad did a little more than chase him out. He pretty much told him if he didn't get out, what would happen?
Well, my father said, well, of course, he was going to strip him. That's what they did in those days. They would strip you and make you run the streets, but he was going to break his kneecaps.
That's absolutely amazing. What a great story. When I read it, it just totally amazed me. If you like the Tony Knapp interviews, you will have to read his book, My Father, My Don. There is much more information than what was in the interview, and I am sure, like me, you won't want to put the book down. So to find out how to purchase this amazing true story, just go to Tony's website at www.myfathermydon.com. Segment 8 is a candid conversation where Tony talks about his sobriety, both before and after meeting the love of his life, his wife Laura. He will also talk about his mother, how she came to visit him in jail, and the effect that conversation had on him even to today. So stay tuned to the next Celebrity Talk.
I gotta be me.